Take three.
So
So
Chris,
we were in the middle.
so we had to do a lot of change management, where it was a requirement to clean up 2/3 of the personnel and really reorganizing, having a new architecture, and teaching everyone their roles, cross training, and we had a major recovery action plan, which was in a compliance agreement with HUD, 166 tasks that today we have completed. Out of the 166, 22 are left over. So when you do that math, the 144 have been, executed. When you speak about the financials, it is something that was very serious because we had a $6.6 million debt, overall on the agency. Today, through our good negotiations and our effective collaboration, we've been able to reduce that debt by literally $4.5 million, as well as increase a positive cash flow in our rent collections, and take the money that HUD is giving you through these grants and truly pour it back into the buildings, into the developments, ensuring that, when I got here, we had over 125 vacant units, which was a problem. And we had to basically take the funding necessary to go out and follow the right processes to procure the right professionals to come in and do the right investment. Chris, one example, the immediate thing when I got here, right, the 624 Nye building is all senior citizen disabled. It did not have a fire suppression system, which was very problematic. So one of the first things I had to do was take action and immediately work with DCA, work with HUD, with our local building department, go out and solicit, secure, the right professional, and install a fire pump suppression system to protect my seniors.
And I want to interrupt you. What that really means is bring it up to code. It was, I don't want to say substandard, but it was not compliant with code.
Well, it was never installed.
Yeah, exactly.
There were many fire alarm panels that were not brought up to code. It was a lack of modernization. But as far as just simply having a fire pump suppression system to protect the seniors. I love my residents, and for me, I know this is my purpose in life because, again, I'm a product of this environment, and I take pride in continuously opening the doors and empowering the Black and brown community so that they can truly see a light for success. And it all starts with the old hierarchy of Maslow theory, right? If you got great shelter, you got a good roof over your head, and at least you feel safe and decent, that you live comfortably, you're gonna do well. I mean, that's a fact. So we've been implementing my community wealth building model and my E3 model, which is all about economic, employment, and environmental impact. Is what are we doing differently to prepare for the future? So we are looking at repurposing our assets. We're looking at in the repositioning of the assets to make sure that the residents get a better quality of life through the improvements, renovations, and restoration that is needed. Because when the physical needs assessment was done after conducting it, I realized $56 million is what was needed to really bring all these developments up to par. But fortunately, because of my experience, I've been fortunate enough through the partnerships and through the critical paths to really use the capital improvement dollars most effectively back into the developments to stop the hemorrhaging.
I want to back up a little bit. Two things step out to me, right? When you mentioned the word guru, you started as a guru. I like that, right? Not just because I'm a Gangstar fan, right? Gangstar hip-hop music. But guru has got a spiritual side to it, right? And that's like with the beads on your hand. So to me, when you mention that, I mean, that's a holistic, we talk about holistic approach. And it's not just nuts and bolts, right? We got people here.
You hit the nail on the head, and I was a big fan of Guru. That was giving away our era there. But the fact of the matter is, yes, when we speak to how do we get a community galvanized who's been battered, who has been, disrespected, distrusted, who has really, suffered tremendously. How do we get them galvanized and restore that hope? And it starts from the emotional deposits, right? The respect, the bringing them to the table, allowing them to have a seat at the table and letting them know what you're doing, communicating, getting the feedback. And then the spiritual sense, right? Never afraid to invoking, God in the sense of why he put me here and what and where we're going with it, and the fact that they believe in what I'm doing, not just based on the plans that are written out, not just based on the words that are shared, but more on the actions that are deliverables, right? Showing those results and letting them see that the physical, right? It's always, for me, as an ESP, you got the emotional, the spiritual, and the physical. And then lastly, letting them know that when you got your financials in order, you can be solvent, have a strong footing to prepare for tomorrow's future. And even though we're not completely out of the woods, the fact of the matter is that the progress in 2 years that has been made is a really unique one, and it's a story that needs to be told because of the fact that, again, I can't thank enough, Mayor Voss. I can't thank enough the city council. I can't thank enough those that believed in the efforts, the comprehensive plan, and that of the vision that was laid out for my residents.
Well, listen, I want to mention that a little bit because I know a little bit about history because I covered, the bad old days, right? And then, the poor leadership. I'll say it that way. Be good, generous. The poor leadership. That's my editorializing. Poor leadership. And there was someone else, and then in the transition, someone else who they were thinking about bringing in. But then you mentioned Mayor Voss and these other guys that they brought you in. So to me, I don't want to say you were recruited to come here, but the problems were such that they wanted somebody to actually come in and tackle the issues and fix things and make it better. And you're the person they turn to. So to me, that seemed to be, I guess that's my personal recollection and how I saw it. I mean, they said, we got a problem, this is the guy.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And
I appreciate your integrity and your interpretation because you have always been, at the forefront, Chris, of really, exposing those areas where the residents shouldn't suffer because it is our responsibility to provide them that quality housing. It is our responsibility to ensure that you give them a loving environment. It is our responsibility that we prepare our young for the future and care for them. One of my greatest sayings and what we adopted here is that my people don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care.
Right.
And I think that, for me, you hit the nail on the head. I was brought in as a troubleshooter, problem solver, a game changer who can really position this housing authority to be one of the best in the state and if not in the country. This housing authority is one of the top 5 that was troubled as a housing authority that really wanted to be taken over to basically privatize everything. And when that happens, while in some cases it may not be a bad thing, but when you lose that home rule, the people start to get fearful of the gentrification, of the displacement, of all these things that unfortunately they need to trust. It's a human trait in a psychology that they need to trust in the people that they're dealing with in leadership. And so my board of commissioners, who are very grateful to Chairwoman Darlene Brown and the board of commissioners because they were amazing in their recruitment. I mean, I went through the national search process. I went through the whole interview. It was unbelievable. I mean, they had, questions that were really intentional and they saw my experience. They understood my track record in not just economic community development, but in running public housing from the ground up, where it's an uplifting, it's a Herculean effort, especially when you're troubled, and really just simply compliance, making sure that you're in full compliance, making sure that everyone understands the rules and that they are adherent to the rules and that no one dares to waver on what that must be, so that you start to really transform the culture. And we've been successful to date, and I'm very grateful to my residents in their trust. At every board meeting, we've passed over 200 resolutions. That's 200 policies in 2 years to really put the agency in a position where it's going to be successful, right? So we do legacy work, and I always say that's why I love what we do, because as servant leaders, right, the greatest amongst us, is the servant of all. And for me, I'm deep with respect to the spirituality of why we are placed in different positions in our path to really help those who are most vulnerable, and that's what we're doing. And so I'm excited about the fact that right now, we have literally transcended what many were betting against us. We've transcended sort of the old way of doing business. We have the new best practices. We have amazing internal controls. We have, again, policies that are hitting home on the changes that are necessary, whether it is the non-smoking policy where you can't smoke in the buildings, you can't smoke 25 feet from the building, and enforcing it, whether it is policies, awarding new contracts to new vendors who, they were old vendors who were, hurting the organization, sort of to an extent ripping them off, right? Ripping the organization off. And when you rip the organization off, you're ripping off the residents, right? Because ultimately they're the end result and end user who must be a part of the transition.
I want to stop there because a lot of times people feel like there's victimless crimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we do this and we're not hurting anybody. This just business or just money. But you just made the point. No, that's money. That's that you're overspending and taking. That's for them, right? And the residents know it. They go, we don't have no recreation. We don't have no ping pong balls. We don't have this. The kids can't play in the summer. That's, that money could have been used for that. So, I mean, there's no such thing as victimless crime is what I'm saying.
And that was the thing, and to the credit of the Office of Inspector General, where when they came in, they realized, there were a lot of areas where there were funds that were, improperly appropriated or used. And so we had to clear up all the audit findings through the Office of Inspector General, through that of, the regular independent, professional auditing. And we have to repay that money back. You're talking about millions of dollars that, were misused. And basically you have to repay that back. And so I was fortunate to work out a long-term repayment agreement. Nice. That once we got a positive cash flow, because you have to pay it from non-federal funds. We're talking about you can't use Title 8, Title 9 money. You got to find, right, non-federal funds to pay for that because it was misused.
That's because they're saying don't pay us back with our own money.
Yeah, exactly. And the fortunate part is that it goes back into the program, but the fact of the matter is you just can't pay it from the existing programs like you noted, because you took it from that. And so for us, attacking on several fronts, right? It was like, you had vacant units where right now we're turning around, literally 90 units. We had basically a mismanagement in how maintenance didn't even have a preventative maintenance manual and lacked the training to understand what is my role, what are my duties, what's my tasks. And so you have a task list that they're trained on. You didn't have a work order system that really worked effectively or efficiently at best, to take the tenant's complaint and basically register and generate a work order. And then you had a lot of unfortunate situations where, the neglect was just paramount. And the sad part is that when I walk some of these units, it just breaks your heart because no one should be left in that kind of a unit where you came in, you were going to fix it, you break a hole, and then you put a plastic bag and you leave it there for 2 years until you decide to come back. Or you have a situation of moisture accruing and then mold accruing. We had basements that had mold that we cleaned out. We abated everything. We had fire units that were sitting there dormant. We turned those around. We had 6 fire units that we turned around that are being leased today. We had, fire escapes that we addressed that had, lead-based paint that we had to clean up, remove that, and then, put that in order and be in full compliance with the fire department, and credit to the fire marshals and their team. And also, again, the city has been so instrumental. And I can't thank enough Mayor Voss and my chairwoman in the collaboration to believe in that this was the best plan that would get us out of the woods.
And I want to ask you one thing. How hard was it to be in compliance? Because, a lot of times people make it seem, the rules are so hard. We can't do that. It's a mountain to climb. It's impossible to do. Yet they're the rules. Yes. I mean, so that's my question. How hard is it to be compliant? And is it better to be compliant because then we don't have the other problems?
So it's difficult, but if you have deployed the right processes within a framework system that leads to everyone following the compliance, you know what, these books here, 24 CFR, this is what it's all about, right? And the reality is that at the end of the day, as long as you have implemented the right framework and your people are trained to adhere to the processes, then you will be in compliance. It doesn't become that difficult. It's difficult when you're not doing it, refuse to do it, or never did it, and now all of a sudden you have to start from ground zero.
And that's what we talk about, culture change.
That's correct.
Right?
Yes.
This culture of, you got to change the culture of non-compliance to a culture of compliance.
That is correct. And that's where we are today, which fortunately some of the things, that we had issues with, right? You had a generator who they had spent money to install a generator, never got connected. Wasn't working. Problematic, right? First thing, tackle that. We had elevators that were supposed to be installed, right? Contractors supposedly bankrupt, nowhere to be found, and gone, right? Money thrown out the window, wasted. So you had situations where I had to fix elevators that were, non-operational. Yet you have a senior citizen disabled building. Yet you have folks that unfortunately are reliant on that. We had lights that were out, right? In public housing, you should always have it I'm a Giants fan, so I'm gonna say like Giant Stadium, right? You know, so the reality is that we had lights that were about 35 to 50 lights that were out, non-LED lights that we converted to now LED lights. And you know, working with the police department, very grateful to Director Bowers, you know, we put in a community policing component where right from the campus they're now doing roll call, and all the officers disperse right from the campus. We have vertical patrol sweeps where now the two officers go in and out the building, right, together. They're vertically sweeping the building. We have better communications in that the residents are more willing, without the fear of retaliation, to give us more intelligence. That's critical, right? That only comes from trust, that only comes from hope, that only comes from that restoration of the relationship and bond, that they can believe in what you're doing.
I know that when they tell you, you know, nothing's bad is going to happen to them as a result of them having confided in you.
That's critical. You're absolutely right. You know what, Chris? And the other thing is, you know, resurrecting the tenant associations, doing the resident advisory board, empowering them, you know, letting them be in the driver's seat to say, you're our partner and we want you, we need you because we can't do this alone, and getting their buy-in. So we've been very fortunate. We have some great officers across the board. So we've resurrected, you know, those tenant associations so that they're empowered in every AMP, right? Because the AMPs are your asset management, portfolio strategy, development, and the way that HUD treats it is you're supposed to run your housing stock like the private sector. That's why they did the asset management, so that you're working off of a P&L, profit and loss statement, that shows your progression, your solvency, and your future being bright. So fortunately, I lay out some other things that, you know, the camera system, as you can see, we have a full security surveillance system that we continue to install new cameras and replace them. We've invested a lot, you know, in covering things like the key room. There used to be no coverage on the key room to determine who was getting the key and putting it back. Now we have that. We cover the security room where you have dispatch and you have a security personnel that is trained to really identify and double check who the person is going into the building.
Yes. That sounds like modernization.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's exactly what it's called.
Right.
I love your just simplicity of it, but it's what it is. It's modernization.
You have to modernize, right? We got to bring. You talk about bringing up the code, being compliant, but then also to modernize. We don't do things that way anymore.
Correct. You have to be forward thinking. You got to be very intentional, right? Where everything as part of your designing is looking at the future, incorporating technology, right? That's one of the things that we've been doing. Our Wi-Fi, we have Fios that came in and changed the copper lines to fiber lines, like, you know, things you have to do to equip the residents and your buildings so you can operate more swifter and more expediently. And I give you another example, which is great, right? One of the things we did, our physical needs assessment, we do for HUD every year. It's called, you know, a FAS, and what that is basically a scoring methodology that, you know, this housing authority used to fail at a 6 out of 8. We had jumped to a 19, nice. And that was a huge win for us. Purging the wait list, you had 2,000 people on the wait list, Chris, and I had the folks in the cloud. What that means is that they were parked. The applications were parked, and they will never purge. So you don't really know who's interested. You don't really know who basically anymore should be on the list, right? Because we're always trying to help, you know, victims of domestic violence, our veterans, which is very critical, our senior citizens, disabled individuals, and those individuals who are, you know, Irvington based and who are homeless as well. You know, the homelessness is something that we've taken on. So, you know, one of the things that we're looking to do different is also add those individuals as a preference to the wait list. But here's a big one. Also, reentry. You know what? We immediately adopted in empowering a workforce that we were recruiting, like an apprentice program that was created, and particularly our women from the Irvington Housing Authority, who might have been troubled, might have been a part of a gang, might have, you know, had their issues in and out, right, with the system. And guess what? We've had successfully 3 of our pilot, you know, individuals graduate and do wonderful things. One just moved down to Louisiana, aka my girl Mookie. Special shout out to her, and wishing her all the best.
And I want to interrupt right there because, you know, you mentioned being a product of the Housing Authority, but when you understand the problems that come when people get troubled and things that can happen. But then, like you said, reentry, they come back home. That's where they're from. So when you talk about coming home, they're coming back to where they're from. but you've got to try to integrate them. We talk about reintegrating them into the community, but then also gainfully employing them, and then also giving them a stake, right? So we don't do the same things that made you do the other stuff that you did before.
Yes.
Right?
See, the resolution is you have to have resources, as you're noting, an incubator type of system and a conduit to give them, the opportunity, right? And that's economic mobility. I know, directly firsthand that when, I was 10 years old, man, when I was burnt out of my home, we had to jump out of a third-story apartment window, and we lost everything. There was a casualty in our property, and you know what? We lost everything. And I remember being homeless for 5 months and, moving into the projects and growing up at that point, which was a survival of the fittest, night and day for me, in the sense of like, holy cow, that was real mismanagement, neglect, crime infested, where, the strategy was just contain it. And so seeing all that, for me, those vices and being, a part of that environment is what led me to enter into a career of public housing and economic community
development. You wanted to fix the things that you saw were wrong.
Yes, brother. I mean, for me, it was truly, heartfelt that, there had to be a better way. There had to be a better way to live.
It don't have to be like this.
It don't have to be like this. You know what? And we have to fix it because it's broke, right? And I saw a lot of brokenness, and the only way that I knew, right, in order to succeed, I mean, you're talking about, I was the first in my family, right, to go to a D1 school, Seton Hall University. And remember, when I was in high school, you couldn't really be a nerd because, you know what, if you were one of the ringleaders, you couldn't have that status of, being a nerd. You had to basically hold it down and still be that posse leader and stuff like that. And so for me personally, right, when I went to Seton Hall University, it was with the intent of giving back. I was always coming back to my hood and making sure that, while we make a living from what we get, we make a life from what we give. Nice. And the reality of it is that I ended up going to Stevens Institute of Technology and getting 2 graduate degrees. And then I went to Harvard and studied, the systemic and endemic issues of why public housing was what it was and why low-income communities, in urban America fail, when they don't have the right frameworks, the right, resources and the right models that are being deployed. So going to Harvard and doing community development and public policy, all of that just equipped me with the wisdom that, I have today to be able to come back to communities like IHA and say, hey, here's the roadmap. Here's how we do it collectively, and here's how we become consistent in our practices and make a commitment that says all of us have the free will to choose the right path or the wrong path. And if I'm giving you quality housing and the opportunities to succeed, then you have no excuse not to take advantage of the right opportunity to get ahead in life.
And that's the answer to those people. Those whining minority, they're always crying about something. Well, you know what? Give us a chance, give us what we need to go, and then we won't whine anymore. Correct?
That's right. And that's why economic mobility, to Governor Murphy's credit and to, what is being looked at now, is so critical. And what we did in Newark was so critical because it's all about the empowerment. It's all about really having a seat at the table and providing the right resources that provide a roadmap that say, here's where I am today, here's where I want to be, and you did it, and so I want to follow that same model, and I want to be successful, and I just want to be able to pull myself up by my bootstraps, be giving, the parameters that I need, and the resources that I need, so that
give me some boots with some straps on, right? Give me some boots with some straps
on.
So I can pull them up, right?
I love that. It's equitable growth. I mean, that's what ultimately equitable growth is all about. So when we deploy a community wealth building model, what it means is, hey, we're going to give everybody the opportunity to have the economic mobility to graduate and continue to grow, right? And it's okay. I tell folks sometimes, I don't want you to change who you are in your authenticity, but I want you to grow to where it is that we're going to take you. So like, for instance, they didn't have a summer camp for the kids, right? 2 years in a row, I've successfully launched the summer camp, where we had to raise money privately through campaigns and make sure that I could allocate some resident services dollars to that. They never used to do that because the money was not there. Unfortunately, the money was misused and, inappropriately appropriated elsewhere. And so that wasn't a priority because they were so busy, looking at, oh my God, all these brush fires and these wildfires and, these immediate reaction of emergencies that they're like, oh, we don't have any more money left for other things, right? But that came from neglect, delayed maintenance. That came from your lack of having a system and framework with processes that lead to an outcome that is favorable and result oriented for the residents.
I'm glad you mentioned that. There's two things I want to mention. We talked before about being recruited, and I will never forget. I credit former East Orange Mayor Robert Bowser. Right, I asked him one time about leadership. What is leadership? What is management? And his philosophy. And he said, "I, as the mayor, my job is to talk to people, and they tell me identify the problem. Right? What's the problem? Right? And he said, what's the problem? And then he asks you, what do you need from me to solve the problem? Then you give them what they need, and then you get out the way, let them go do what you brought them in there to do. And then you check up that was his that's what his leadership model as mayor was, right?
Let me tell you, and that's spot on, Chris, and that's the best advice anyone could give you. And I love Mayor Bowser. God bless him. He was an incredible leader, and that's how Mayor Voss is. To his credit, he respects your authority in what you know best, and he says, "Listen, I'm here to support you. You go run and do what you need to do to take care of my people, take care of my residents, and you got my full support." And when you have that kind of a bond, when you have that kind of leadership, it is transformative. The results that come out of it. You're talking about, there's a humanitarian, yet, physical real estate combination of forces coming together because you're allowed to do what you do best and you're valued and giving that support, and then it reciprocates because now you turn back to the mayor, and Mayor Voss has always been there whenever I needed something relative to this agency. He is so committed and so passionate about getting us to where we need to go. He fought. His brother, man, he fought hard, and he took on HUD, where they were trying to take it over. And to his credit, him and the chairwoman, they were like, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to allow privatization to come over and scare our people. We're not going to allow for you guys to just simply, take it over and say,
give us who you think we should have.
Precisely. Because what happens is, when that occurs, that distrust grows further. That lack of hope grows further, right? And that lack of empowerment will never be established, because now it's more of a dictatorship. It's more like, hey, listen, this is what it is. We're gonna displace. We're gonna basically close this. We're gonna use this for that, and you don't really know. The pulse is not there on what the people, the residents, need, and that's what we've been successful with. And I gotta say, it was a great quote. The Honorable Bilal Beasley, I remember, his leadership, and the vice chair who was on my board, Miss Beasley, and he used to always say, tell me what your vision is, because as you know, without it, our people will perish. And that is always something that stuck with me as a young guy who I was in the business, many moons ago. And, I tell folks, I'm a recovering politician. But the fact of the matter is that, as an elected official, what that means when your people are starving and suffering, saying, give me a vision so that I can cling on and galvanize myself and be motivated and inspired to go out and do what you're asking of me. So we have our mantra, right? We say, we can, we will, watch us make a difference. And we recite it. The kids, if I walk you over next time to the summer camp, or actually we might just take a walk over and you hear the kids tell you, we can, we will, watch us. That's my mantra, because I needed them to understand early on that what you've gone through is in the past. And the light that we're putting before you is a beacon, not just of hope, but a reality.
It's not a train coming to run you over.
Precisely, my brother. It's a reality of really what we can do in our purpose. And that's where we are. And here's the one thing I'll share with you that has also been incredible is the fact that I think this is a model that you will see that could be a national model, right? Taking all the partners at the table, from IPD, Mayor Voss and his office, the state, Senator Booker, and taking Governor Murphy and Lieutenant Governor Oliver, and the help that they've given to this agency, along with HUD, because they had to be won over. It was like they didn't believe, they didn't think that we could make it happen.
You say they, you mean HUD?
I mean HUD, correct? Yeah. Let me be correct on that. So HUD, they were our partner, but given what they had experienced, given what they were dealing with,
They were skeptical.
I don't fault them, right? You know, that's the right thing to say. Hey, listen, we don't know if this is going to be the right path and if this is going to work out. But to their credit, they've come around and they've been nothing but amazing in their support.
So your job is not only to win over the residents and the employees, but you got to win over HUD too. You got to convince. I mean, so you've been convincing from the beginning, huh?
Yes, sir. So it's like you're serving three masters. You have HUD, right? The city and the residents. So I've been fortunate, and I thank God every day. It's been a blessing to really mobilize all three to our advantage in a hybrid fashion and really put it to the best use of our residents and our environment.
Which is what it's all about, right?
That's correct. And on top of that is, looking at how now with the demo dispo, which means that we're disposing of the Crescent Lane assets and eventually going to demolish them. And we're doing that with the intent that, remember, we run a housing voucher choice program. So we run 400 plus vouchers, and we are basically always looking to expand that program because that's another opportunity and strong economic mobility vehicle. And we had to reform that because that was problematic, and that they ended up owing maybe $1.2 million
because it wasn't being used
in the
properly.
misuse, and yeah, it was through the CMAP. You had a low performance standard. Now we're at standard, and then we're shooting back for high performance. But everybody's going to get a tenant protective voucher, which is going to give them a better quality of life, giving the tens of thousands of units that are being developed in Irvington, Newark, East Orange. You can expect that now with that voucher, this family will be able to go to a new unit.
Is that Section 8? That sounds like Section 8.
That is, sir. That is Section 8. The tenant protective voucher is a Section 8 program voucher.
Because, the interesting thing to me about Section 8, once I learned a little bit about it, is that it's good anywhere in the country.
That's correct.
That's what I thought was fascinating. I said, wow, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because, we talk about relocating and changing your life and open mobility. And I think sometimes people think, Section 8, that's just for the poor and the projects and in the hood. But you can take that and go anywhere in America, correct?
That's correct. Yes, you can. And on top of that, you can even use it for home ownership opportunities. You can graduate from that voucher as a renter to be a homeowner. And that's why we have a very successful FSS program, which is your family self-sufficiency program, where we're trying to create more homeowners throughout the housing choice voucher process. And so we're super excited, as to what, in 5 years, 2024 will look like for IHA, potentially developing more senior citizen developments for veterans, some artists, entrepreneurial makers, housing, where we can add to the portfolio and make sure that, we are accommodating the needs of those that need us most. And that is based on, market data that we have. Chris, one more thing just to share, which is very pertinent, is the number of reviews that I had to undergo, when I took office, right? I mean, major, like 12 reviews, which all consume your time.
From HUD.
Yeah, from HUD, correct, and from the state. We submitted for the first time in probably, I was told, 9 years, our budget 2 years ago to DCA, which is a requirement under the state statute, all right, and got it approved. And when they received it, they said, oh my God, they said, thank you so much. It's been so long since we've gotten this and tried to get it. So that was a big win for us. So we've had, multiple wins, and that's why it's imperative to celebrate those wins.
But that's also a sign of good faith, right? You talk about the question you got to answer, the belief you have to instill when you do things that have not been done before but should have been being done. That's also a sign, right? We show how you build that trust and that relationship. How do you win over HUD? How do you win over the state to get them to, to go? Because they got to see that you're doing what needs to be done, right?
Well, they got to see those efforts, and their measurements are very metrics based, right? I mean, everything is data driven. So they look at a dashboard, and all they see is what the dashboard reports. But truly, once they get into the nuts and bolts of what's going on microscopically, then they understand. Oh my God, wow! How did you, or what are you doing differently, and how did you were able to get that agency out of that rut, out of that, redness that it was bleeding. And here we are today, thankfully, because of the Recovery Action Plan, which we've successfully executed that at 95%, because of the fact that we changed policies in the ACOP, the Administrative Continued Occupancy plan, right? Because of the fact that we've passed the Board of Commissioners 200, resolutions, that's policies, right? And awards, and because of the fact we've taken the capital fund money and the 1.2 million that we get every year, and then you got to deduct a old debt bond of 400,000, so we're only left with $800,000, a year, and HUD every year is reducing your capital fund, which is very problematic, right? So you got to account for the 20%, 15% reduction, and then you still have to catch up on the $56 million that was noted in your physical needs assessment that the developments needed to be brought up to par. So that's why we're doing on AMP 1 the Crescent Lane, the demo dispo. On AMP 2 and 3, which is 81 Union and 6249, we're doing basically the RAD, which is the renovation weatherization program, where you're going to rehabilitate those developments. And on top of that, the community rooms, we've invested in giving now the residents beautiful community rooms, security surveillance system. They have an Echo, Alexa in the rooms, and so we're doing things that are transformative. In the 624 senior citizen community room, you can check it out. We have a Cafe Harmony. We've invested in giving some more recreational sort of a ping pong table, foosball table. We've created a library. We've created all sorts of resources there, and giving the residents a feel that they now can come out and be a part of their community without any reservation.
All right. And there's two things I want. One thing I really want to ask you about before we go, right? And we talk about coming from a place but not being of that place, or your roots and where you come from, or having been in the product of public housing, so you understand the potential that people who reside in public housing have. But early on, you also mentioned that public housing was always meant and intended to be transitional, right? After World War II, right? We needed housing for the soldiers coming back, but you come here, you stay for a little while, you eat stuff up, and you move on out, which is also, I guess, goes back to the vouchers as well, right? But the reason I mention that is because we talk about how things have changed and how economies and the times, and then the perception. You also mentioned that times change, the economy goes bad. All of a sudden you can't transition out. You got to stay a little longer. But then people start going, oh, this is the project, this is the hood. It's supposed to be ghetto. The ghettoization and the mentality, and then the decline that comes. Oh, the hallway's supposed to be stinky because it's the hood, it's the ghetto, right? That's how it's supposed to be. But that's not really how it was. And also, a lot of times those things. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want to mention this, right? Because this is me editorializing again. Because the racial connect, right? There used to be white people in the projects. Whether nobody knows about it. Right now, we talk about black and brown. People say the projects, they say the ghetto, they think black and brown. But I know for a fact, over in Jersey City where you used to be, that people live on Duncan Avenue. They said, oh, Duncan Avenue, once upon a time, there was white people on Duncan Avenue. There's the Duncan Avenue projects, right? And they live up the hill now on Duncan Avenue, where they was managing buildings. But they're proud to say, yeah, I used to live down there. It's not like it was when I was there, but it's not like that. And then closer to home, here in Irvington, right? Talk about the Irvington Housing Authority. And also, I work for the Worrell newspaper. It's the Irvington Herald newspaper. When I came on, my editor's name was Tom Canavan, right? Tom Canavan, right? White guy, right? His brother's a brain surgeon, right? An oncologist, brain surgery, right? But he was the managing editor. He was the overall editor at the union office, and I worked for him. But come here. You also mentioned the fire department. Come here one day. I'm doing a story, and they're going, "Oh yeah, you over at the Worrell." Tom Canavan. They said, I remember Tom Canavan because he's an Irvington guy. Once again, white people who are Irvington guys. People think of Irvington, they think of Newark, they think these places that, oh, that's just blacks and browns. But no, this is a white guy. He's a fire guy. He's from here, and he's talking about when he grew up and he went to Irvington High School. He's like, oh yeah, I remember Tom. This. He was from the projects.
That's right.
Right, and I'll never forget that because he thought, when I was like, wow, that's cool. He thought he had made a mistake by saying that Tom Canavan's family was from the project. But I said, no, that probably explains why Tom Canavan is who he is. Right? The guy who hired me, right? And I gave my first reporter's job, and who, backed me up on things. But and then yourself being a product as well, right? I mean, it's not what you think it is, right?
You're spot on, and I got to credit your sense of geography, your historianism, and your intellectuality on that, because the reality is, yes, public housing was never designed to be generational housing. It was meant to springboard a very low to moderate income family out of poverty, right? The whole purpose was, you're right, going back to Lyndon Johnson, going back to World War II, what you had was the demographics at the time in these areas in urban Essex County and urban Hudson County. You did have a predominance of, Caucasian residents, and lo and behold, the projects, as we call them, were slowly but surely being filled more by black and brown because of the migration that was taking effect, and because you had, fires in the 80s that were happening, right? That people were being burnt out of their, normal homes, like I mentioned earlier, and you had, a displacement or making way for gentrification, so they were taking the folks and putting them into concentrated poverty, right? If you read a great book by former Secretary Cisneros, Despair to Hope, he dissects and addresses why public housing failed, right? Our people. Because again, it was not meant to culturally concentrate the poverty and generate your cycle of thinking that that's where you would constantly be residing in, the four walls that you were constrained by. That's not what it was meant to be. I was blessed because I believed that there was more to the four walls, and that, we had to take our disadvantages and play them to our advantage, and that we needed to show the world and show those outside of our four walls that, you just can't contain us. You just can't, make us think that the neglect and mismanagement is normalcy. That's not, right? The monies that were being squandered or mismanaged, that was normalcy. It's not. And so it is incumbent upon us to recognize that, in this climate today, where we are in public housing, black and brown folks, that we too can, right, have a movement that would lead to a transformation of our people coming out.
Just like the other guys did.
Just like those other groups did, the other ethnicities, without a doubt. They did it, so too can we. The reality is that it is up to us in leadership to put forth the right instruments and to serve as a instrument for the people in serving them the right way. And that's why I'm so passionate about, servant leadership, because, the reality is that if you do it correctly, scientifically and artistically, it will work. I've proven it in the places that I've been at. Whenever I left a system, a legacy that was timeless, because it was now changed where it made it better. Whether you're addressing the poverty, whether you're addressing the ADA issues, whether you're addressing, the vices, whether you're addressing, the culture implications of the cyclical, endemic problems, right? We were able to put forth resolutions that would lead them to prosperity, right? The number one thing in my philosophy is that uncertainty is the enemy of prosperity.
Nice.
So if I give you a certitude as to where we're going and how we're going to get there, you're absolutely going to bond with me, buy in, and say, let's drive.
Which goes back to Bilal Beasley's vision thing, huh?
That's right, my brother. And so at the end of the day, I'm just grateful, again, that we get a chance to really share all the things that this agency, this housing authority, has overcome, and the challenges, frustrations, and suffrage that it had, where today we're in more of a positive, a youthful, a promising, hopeful tomorrow that will lead them to a promised land of economic mobility and of a quality of life that is deserved to any person in the world, just from a human being perspective.
And on that note, I will turn this off, because